Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 58th audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I'm the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. I'm coming to you today with a very important message and a file that I think is going to be jam-packed with a lot of pertinent, relevant research and perhaps a good basis, I think, for an understanding of what's going on in the world right now. It has taken me a number of days, actually a couple of weeks, to compile the information for this particular file. I've been researching these things since the late days of July, and even doubling down a little bit harder after the July 29th rally of President Trump in Erie, Pennsylvania. We are living through a period of time in the world, and I think it's evident now for much of us to see, where the elected class, the deep state apparatus, the infestation, the cancer that is inside our institutions and our community levers of what we perceive to be power, but are truly in many cases illegitimate representations of power. We're witnessing an overt conflict between that class and we the people everywhere. We're witnessing, for lack of a better term, total war against the ideas of humanity, against the ideas of moving the world forward, against the ideas of decency, common sense, and virtue. And this was to be expected in this process. To defang a hydra, you have to cut off all of the various heads and remove the tentacles and the infestations, but you also have to get kinetic with the beast itself. In many respects, and we've talked a lot about on this program, there are a number of different factions in the world that sort of have aligned interests and have forged an alliance of sorts that is destabilizing and forcing the deep state monster around the world to reveal itself and to come out of the shadows and to deploy all of its assets in need to preserve its own existence and its own longevity into the future. In that process comes a large amount of burden and request put on we the people everywhere, not only in the United States, but in all nations, to balance the transition through the system and to preserve the consciousness of mankind. In other words, to act as the levee, the bulwark on which truth, justice, righteousness, and just common decency as one mankind moving forward can swing and can operate. And so that, I think, is the job of the awakened community all around the world, the ever-expanding base of we the people patriots, coming from all different walks of life and backgrounds. The Anons out there as well in that group, being a little bit more research-focused in many regards, have an important part to play to further and preserve and congeal that awakening process without overly influencing. In other words, without exercising an inordinate amount of manipulation, whether for good or for ill, about how others perceive or feel about circumstances. This is a process that is showing the entire world, and specifically the sleeper population even still, that the idea of R versus D, the idea of one party versus another in a fair representation, the idea that our vote in many respects even counts, is a complete falsehood and a lie. And so we are witnessing the conflict now between the forces of good, between what we would call white hats, between what we would call open source heroes from all walks of life who have chosen to step into the gap, to whistleblow, to leverage their skills and talents and move the needle forward. We are witnessing the conflict between that group of people and those what we would call white hat military alliances, and what remains of this deep state, Five Eyes intelligence community, space-based community apparatus, and what sorts of threats that they may still be able to deploy. We're going to talk a lot today about the Maui fires, but we're going to get first into some other information going on around the world that I think informs the greater conflict that we're describing right now. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. Currently, and for a number of weeks now, the Russian military has been running what we could call biological containment operations to prevent contaminants, pathogens, personnel, documents, and evidence from leaving the Ukrainian countryside and being smuggled out of Eastern Europe, much in the same way that you would smuggle weapons, children, drugs, etc. The Russians have a vested interest in ensuring that any biological pathogens and biological research basis for any pathogens remains within the countryside and acquired to the best of their ability, right? ensuring that certain things are not destroyed, ensuring that there is evidence collected in many respects is necessary, because many of these weapons, as we know, were geared to target the Russian peoples in general, and then several other large genomes around the planet, sort of bloodlines or subsects of humanity that this Luciferian cabal at the very top has hated, we'll say maybe extra especially. And so in an article published on the New York Times, we're going to discuss a little bit about Russia's actions here over these last few weeks. But the New York Times put out an article on July the 21st, 2023. Remember, it's important to monitor your enemy's comms. Russia barraged Ukrainian ports for the fourth night in a row on Friday, striking granaries in Odessa and mounting a show of naval force on the Black Sea in a deepening showdown that imperils a vital part of the global food supply. Now, remember, this is coming from the New York Times. The Kremlin this week withdrew from a year-old agreement that allows ships carrying food from Ukrainian ports to bypass a Russian blockade, and began a concentrated bombardment of facilities used to ship grain and cooking oil across the Black Sea. The Russian military warned that any vessels attempting to reach Ukraine would be treated as hostile, and their nations will be considered to be involved in the conflict on the side of the Kiev regime. On Friday, Russia conducted naval exercises in the northwestern Black Sea, the part near the coastline, backing up the suggestion that it could seize or destroy ships of non-combatant nations. Russia's Ministry of Defense said in a statement that a missile boat fired anti-ship cruise missiles and destroyed a mock target vessel, while ships and planes of the Black Sea Fleet practiced isolating an area temporarily closed to navigation and conducted a drill to apprehend a mock intruder vessel. Missile strikes around dawn destroyed 100 tons of peas and 20 tons of barley at the port in Odessa, according to Oleg Kuiper, the head of the regional military administration. That came 2 days after an attack on the port just outside of Odessa destroyed 60,000 tons of grain, which was to be loaded onto ships, enough to feed more than 270,000 people for a year, according to the World Food Program. Now, we need not go any further in the Times. This establishes the basis for what's going on. We know that Russia withdrew from the grain agreement. We know that Russia has only withdrawn from its agreements with these other nations, and especially with Ukraine, after the other party has already violated the agreement. So in the research that I've been doing into this, the basis of the question became, why did Russia violate the agreement and then immediately begin shelling food supplies? We've seen lots of humanitarian video footage emerging from the central and eastern Ukrainian countryside of Russian soldiers evacuating civilians, rebuilding infirmaries, treating other combatant parties in a mortally wounded state as friendly as human, agreeing to even supply them water at the expense of their own canteens. And so it made no sense that we would see Russia destroying this food and withdrawing from this agreement, and doing so in such a rapid fashion in the midsummer, when there was a pause of sorts, if we will, or a lull in activity on the Russians' offensive military operations, because we were dealing with the attempted Ukrainian counteroffensive, and Wagner PMC has been in a relocation phase for these last really 4 to 6, well, no, at this point, almost 2 months. So as we look at this, I was wondering what in the world would cause this, and I believe I may have found an answer. Let me pull this up here. A number of weeks ago, a blurb came out on an online forum discussing the idea of weaponized corn being found in Bakhmut, Ukraine, bioengineered corn that was being combined with arsenic. I didn't delve too much into the report at the time, although I believed the report. The basis seemed sound. It was a very short blurb, and I went and pulled up some of that information for today, and I think that this may tie directly into what happened with the Ukrainian grain deal and why grain suddenly became a military target. Set to be published 1 December of this year in the journal Science of the Total Environment, volume 902, an article written by Prabhat Kumar, Hokyul Song, and Ki-Hyun Kim. And it looks like they may have an et al. Here. In cooperation with the Department of Environmental Science in India, the Department of Earth Resources and Environmental Engineering in the Republic of Korea, and the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering in the Republic of Korea. The title of the article, Nanoparticles Modulate Heavy Metal and Arsenic Stress in Food Crops, Hormesis for Food Safety, Security, and Public Health. Public health, interesting. Highlights of the article, the nanoparticles-based HM hormesis as stress alleviation is important to produce food crops. Such alleviation approaches for crops and hormesis need to be elucidated more precisely. Metal oxide nanoparticles and CNTs were able to ameliorate HMA stress with great efficiency. In the abstract of the article, heavy metal and arsenic contamination at the soil-food crop interface is a threat to food security and public health worldwide. The potential ecotoxicological effects of heavy metal arsenic on food crops can perturb normal physiological, biochemical, and molecular processes. To protect food safety and human health, nanoparticles can be applied to seed priming and soil amendment. Seed priming, that's code for seed geoengineering, as manifestation of hormesis to modulate heavy metal arsenic-induced oxidative stress in edible crops. This review provides a comprehensive overview of nanoparticles-mediated alleviation of that stress in food crops and resulting hormetic effects. The underlying biochemical and molecular mechanisms in the amelioration of heavy metal arsenics-induced oxidative stress is delineated by covering the various aspects of the interaction of the nanoparticles themselves with plant microbes, phytohormones, signaling molecules, in other words, on-off molecules, and plant growth bioregulators. With biotechnical advances such as clustered regularly interspaced palindromic repeats or CRISPR gene editing technology, the efficacy of nanoparticles and associated hormesis has been augmented to produce pollution-safe designer cultivars. Fascinating. So they're building plants, and it looks like they're building plants with an eye on the heavy metal, arsenic, and toxicological effects of that particular poison. Another article published 17 February 2023, Arsenic and Cadmium Toxicity in Plants, Mitigation and Remediation. During growth and development, plants, this is from the abstract, during growth and development, plants uptake a wide range of mineral nutrients from soil, including non-essential toxic elements such as arsenic and cadmium. These contaminants inhibit uptake and translocation of solutes and nutrients in the body, as well as water, induce oxidative damage, and disrupt plant metabolism. Such toxicity directly affects the health of human individuals relying on these plants as a primary food source. Arsenic and cadmium generally follow relatively similar pathways for entry in plant systems. They utilize certain common routes and membrane transporters for cellular uptake. However, some machinery also differs. As a defense and detoxification mechanism, plants have evolved adaptive features such as efflux mechanisms, complexation with thiol-rich compounds, and vacuolar sequestration, plasma membrane efflux transporters, phytokeratin complexation, and subsequent vacuolar sequestration have been reported to render arsenic and cadmium tolerance in important crops like rice. On the other hand, arsenic contamination in soil can cause massive phytotoxicity. Besides the traditional methods like soil amendments, use of soil microorganisms, think Bill Gates, and plant growth regulators, modern-day approaches like genetic engineering and seed priming techniques, especially with nanoparticles, can significantly augment plant tolerance against metal stress and associated biogeochemical calamities. Is someone going to dump arsenic in the food supply? It's beginning to sound that way. In an article set to be published in the journal Environmental Pollution, volume 333, on September 15th of this year, coming up in 1 month from today, machine learning facilitated prediction of heavy metal contamination in distillers' dried grain. Excessive heavy metal contamination often occurs in feed due to natural or anthropogenic activity, leading to poisoning and other health problems in animals. In this study, a visible near-infrared hyperspectral imaging system was used to reveal the characteristics of spectral reflectance of distillers' dried grains with solubles doped with various heavy metals and to effectively predict metal concentrations. 2 types of treatment were used, namely tablet and bulk. 3 quantitative analysis models were constructed based on the full wavelength, and through comparison, the support vector regression model was found to show the best performance. As typical heavy metal contaminants such as copper and zinc were used for modeling and prediction, the prediction set accuracy of the tablet samples doped with, copper and zinc was 94.9% and 86.2%, respectively. In addition, a novel characteristic wavelength selection model based on SVR was proposed to filter characteristic wavelengths, which improved the detection performance. The regression accuracy of the SVR model on the prediction set of tableted samples with different copper and zinc concentrations was 94.7 and 85.9%. The accuracy of bulk samples with different copper and zinc concentrations was 81% and 80%, respectively, which indicated that the detection method can reduce pretreatment steps and verify practicability. Why in the world are we trial running machine learning prediction for heavy metal in our plants and in our grains? I pose the question again, is someone planning to dump heavy metals into the food supply? We know that's a favorite of the Kabbalah structure. We know that the mRNA nanoparticles are also a favorite of the structure, and we've talked about those in these articles as well. So my submission to all of you out there is for Russia's actions targeting grain, it is extremely possible, especially with the U.S. Department of Defense biological and weaponization activity happening in the Ukrainian countryside, and which has been happening there for a very long time, since at least 2003. Is it not possible that we were standing to export serious biocontaminants around the world that could not be allowed to, and that anyone coming to retrieve said food stores or biocontaminants could also be assumed to be acting under the flag of the enemy? I think this is a very reasonable basis for discussion, and I postulate that thesis, and I put that out there. It makes a lot of sense when we consider that Russia has stepped up their military operations in Ukraine in recent days and is planning on deploying Zircon hypersonic missiles on their submarines, according to an article that actually just dropped today, presumably for reporting that has occurred over the last, I will say, 5 to 7 days. Zircon missiles are extremely fast and powerful. They're maneuverable at ultra high speeds and are capable of reaching up to Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound. It makes them very difficult to defend against, even with some of the most advanced missile defense systems out there. Switching gears here, let's talk a little bit about Turkey. We're going to talk a little bit about the CIA war that's happening. We've witnessed a number of events occurring in the Eastern European bloc of nations, and especially in Russia, regarding the same sorts of patterns that are happening within the United States. Infrastructural sabotage actions, what we could call false flags, the destruction of factories, the destruction of important infrastructure or roadways or bridges, things of this nature. It was the MI6 CIA community in conjunction with the Ukrainian Special Services that was capable, or excuse me, that was made capable a terrorist attack on the Crimea Bridge just a few short weeks ago. And so the NATO Five Eyes community has been extremely deep in the Russian war, and the war essentially that's about to expand more publicly all over the world and is beginning to go overtly even now. Recently, we saw aircraft in Turkey headed for Russia. 2 of the 3 flights, I believe, from that day were actually grounded due to technical problems. We had routine aircraft maintenance, I believe, was the excuse that was given. The other flight was allowed to leave. This sounded very much like a search and identify or a search and find sort of operation. And so I went around and I started looking at confirmations or any sorts of evidence that I could find for what might be happening in that area of the world pertaining to Turkey and possibly the CIA or any sort of deep state military or deep state intelligence asset that could offer a threat to the Russian nation. What I found was interesting. Let me move over here if I can find it. Here we go. Let me pull the article all the way up here. All right, taken from agenzianova.com, which I believe is a Greek news agency. Greece, the island of Skiros, could host a U.S. military base. This was published on the, looks like the 14th of August, so yesterday. On the Greek island of Skiros, a U.S. military base may soon spring up. Indeed, according to the Greek press, an amendment to the defense budget bill for 2024 relating to the possibility of establishing new military bases in the territory of Greece. This amendment, despite the still long legislative process for it to be effectively included in law, could help extend the agreement between Greece and the United States on mutual defense cooperation, or MDCA, agreed in 2021, and which should be renewed in 2026. The United States considers Skyros as a strategic island due to its position in the Aegean Sea, and the government of Athens is aware of this. Now, this is not very far from Turkey. In fact, in 2021, as observed by the newspaper Tevima, Greece had also proposed Skyros among the potential areas in which to host U.S. structures. At the time, discussions relating to the island were frozen as Washington's gaze was mainly directed towards Alexandroupoli. However, sources questioned by the Greek newspaper report that Skyros could now return to the fore precisely in view of the renewal of cooperation for mutual defense. Mutual defense. Why would we need mutual defense? Oftentimes, we need mutual defense in this area of the world because the deep state military intelligence community is extremely effective at governmental destabilization. And we've seen that occur in Turkey, in Istanbul, and different cities within Turkey over these last many months, certainly back prior to the Turkish presidential election, but even as far back as late 2021. So it is not surprising to me that Russian-bound flights leaving Turkey, given this backdrop and this sort of nation cooperation at that area to field a deep state military sort of a forward outpost, if you will, in that area. It is not a surprise to me that the Russians may have had concern. Now, again, this is a little bit presumptuous. The official story, of course, being that the aircraft were grounded for maintenance and routine issues that would not sort of pop anything off. However, I find it fascinating that the airframes were the same on these particular flights that were headed into Russia, and the third of the 3 flights was allowed safe passage. We know that the CIA has been instigating and leveraging and flexing its muscle, if we will, in the West African bloc of nations at the behest of the United Nations ECOWAS, sort of that international group, if we will, in response to the Niger military coup. Now, the Niger coup spawned off, let me come over here, on the 26th of July, and they detained the president, and are now threatening to prosecute him, and I believe these threats should be taken seriously. They're also being backed up in many respects by the PMC Wagner forces, the very forces in Eastern Europe that have been waging war against CIA-backed assets and directly with CIA NATO assets themselves for a number of months now, actually going back to just over a year and a half at this point, or nearly a year and a half at this point. So considering that the destabilization in Africa and the destabilization in Eastern Europe and the continued building of alliances in the Arabic nations, such as the Egyptians' militarization of the Sinai and that area of the Negev Desert, where they're actually able to field armor, they've begun doing so, and the Chinese have had their hands brokering arms agreements and helping establish clout, alternative Middle Eastern economies, trading blocks, things like that, which offer a way to detach from the dollar and the Western-backed central banking system, right? The CIA powerhouse, the mitochondria of the deep state, if we will. And so it is not surprising to me that we would be seeing these sorts of destabilizations happening within the West African continent. And I believe that we're going to have significant war coming to this continent in that area of the world, the sub-Saharan African nations and the Saharan African nations, before this process is over. Remember, West Africa has been a very old and very ancient trafficking and destruction ground, sort of a pilfering ground, if we will, for this Kabbalist deep state all around the world that traces its locus of control back to the Canaanite religions and the Canaanite areas and geographies of old. And so the West African people and the African people all around the continent as a whole must be set free. We cannot move forward in the process until we have gotten all of we the people on the side of justice, of patriotism, of preservation for our nation's integrity and sovereignty and pride in what our nation brings to the table, right? And we have to break away, first off, from the mind control, but also from the poverty system that has destroyed the advantage or destroyed the ability, I should say, of different nation and member players around the world to come to the table, as it were. It's fascinating how this process is playing out. If we step back and we look at just the last 6 weeks, we have such an incredible number of large historic scale events popping off. We have renewed offensives and repositioning of military assets all across Eastern Europe. We have the Russian Air Forces intercepting and fending off a Norwegian reconnaissance plane reported in a Russian news outlet just yesterday. We're having Belarus taking kinetic action with their military, preparing for what they believe to be an expanded conflict. We have the Estonian election system under fire publicly now, as investigations within that country are showing that more than a third of the ballots cast in any general election in that nation are fraudulent and have no actual basis in reality. We have Poland militarizing their eastern border with Belarus. We have China involved in the Middle East and Africa. We have Russia involved heavily in Africa. Russia and Turkey, some sort of tenuous but sort of same interests agreement is being, I think, played out in many regards there through the diplomatic actions, through the discussions about Russian backing with grain and resources and fuel and things like that. We have assassinations happening in South America. And what did we have just recently on 8/8/2023? Again, the same pattern that this deep state really likes to put out events, right? We had the Maui direct energy weapon attack. And so we're going to close off our file today with that particular attack and how I believe it ties back to a greater war that is now going overt and going public, and how we can actually see a pseudo progression of events leading up to this attack that told us something large, something staggering was actually going to be coming. So if we come over here, we look at the timeline. On July, it looks like it was the 17th, the governor of Hawaii signed a bill titled the Emergency Proclamation Relating to Housing. It aims to streamline the development process and empower developers and stakeholders to contribute to the creation of more housing opportunities, developers and stakeholders. So in other words, you have to have money. The emergency proclamation reflects extensive input from state and county agencies, all of whom serve the same lapdog, that provided details on process maps, application checklists, common areas, and recommended touch points for engagement. And then he goes on to define a housing emergency. Hawaii has the most expensive housing price in the United States because we have failed to sufficiently build homes for our residents. Our current housing shortage has led to a crisis of increasing homelessness and migration to the mainland, which threatens our ohanas and way of life across Hawaii. Now, we know that the current Kabbalist regime in Hawaii, and has been this way since Hawaii was incorporated into the United States corporation government, they usurped the land from the rightful people of Hawaii, the rightful Hawaii Islanders. And Lahaina was one of the traditional capitals of old of the Islanders, and was also an area in Hawaii that the locals, the community, the ancestral heirs were not willing to cede to the deep state hegemony, the Hydra at the very top. And so 12 days after this particular proclamation is signed, we have a rally with President Trump. And at that rally, it happened in Erie, Pennsylvania. We had a couple of, quite frankly, amazing, what I think are confirmations that something was coming. And I don't think we really fully connected the gravity of what that particularly was. And we can talk about that in just a moment. But I'm going to attempt to share my screen here with you. I know that I usually do these things completely audio-based, but I'd like to share this with you. It is quite amazing. And so here we have a share screen from the Right Side Broadcasting Network Rumble channel of the rally that was streamed on July the 29th. In Erie, Pennsylvania. And this right here is the immediately before President Trump comes out to give his speech to the crowd there at the rally. He did a pre-show interview, or a pre-rally interview with the head and founder of Right Side Broadcasting. And so let's watch this video just for a moment. We're going to watch it carefully, and I'm going to highlight a couple of things to us that I think are very, very important.
Broke the record on handshakes as well in your hospitality. We saw that. You by far had the most people. And they had this still there like.
Did you see it? 5 by 5. See if we can watch it again. We might be able to, we might not. Here we go.
Hospitality, we saw that. You by far had the most people.
5 by 5. Over 1,000 hands. How many deaths are expected in Maui? The number is anywhere between 500 and 1,000. Unfortunately, a number of them being children.
Okay, let's
We're
talk
going to
about
continue watching our video just for a moment.
on that as well. Thoughts on the ball? And it came out to the knowledge there that they want and it's been really, really amazing. We have the witch hunts that go on, have a great witch hunts and speaking on elections. But I introduced to those because we thought that this is they understand it, they get it better than anybody can. So it's pretty good for about 30 to 50 points. And they're going to like most poll, what it is. Which is the general population as far as the general polls goes. That is the most important thing that Mark taking back this White House. Let's talk about the economy. I talked to a lot of seniors, Mr. President. This is not the country they grew up in for several reasons, culturally speaking, the way society is. But let's talk about Bidenomics because that is crushing seniors.
And now we cut to the actual entryway. I'm going to maximize this a little bit for everyone. Pay careful attention to what's behind President Trump. What is that? That is a Black Star flag. Here's another view of it over to the right-hand side. All right. So if in case we need a reminder, the Black Star flag, taken from a sun.com article, the Black Star American flag. The flag was initially introduced as a symbol of defense during the 18th century. However, present-day interpretation of the symbolism has strayed from the original meaning. The Black Star flag first appeared during the American Civil War between 1861 and 1865. Confederate Army soldiers flew the flag to symbolize the opposite of the white flag of surrender. This meant that any units facing the Confederate unit that was flying the flag would not give in nor surrender, and the enemy combatants would all be killed. Take no quarter, leave no quarter, take no prisoner. Or give no quarter, excuse me, take no prisoner. So this flag coming out at the rally on 29 July was clearly a message. And I believe in my reporting that day, I even commented who was the message for. I believe the message was for the very community of individuals that carried out a climate change-based false flag. And we'll iron that out in just a moment here against the people, not only of the United States, but also the Hawaiian We the People nation itself as a whole. So why attack Hawaii and what caused the attack and what does that actually mean for the war and where we're at? Well, I think it means a couple of different things. The first thing that I think it means is that in this smoke out, drag out process, when Julian Assange says 98% of all governments around the world would fall, it is a reasonable extrapolation to say if 98% of governments would fall, how much of the military or how much of the business complex or how much of the big medicine or big ag complex or how much of the transnational billionaire elite community, how much of these arenas would fall? I believe that the number would be very close to the 98%, right at the very, very top when we're talking levers of power and control, the actual intersections of influence that matter. And so this attack happening in Hawaii, clearly prepared by the deep state, but I think it was a forced maneuver. I think the reason it was a forced maneuver and that we drug them out into the light in this fashion with this attack is because the things that are located in Maui are extremely informative, I would say, and could very well be critical to the overall alliance operations itself around the planet and around the world. For example, headquartered in Maui is Peterson and Schriever Space Force Base and the Maui Space Surveillance Complex. The 15th Space Surveillance Squadron operates this complex, which is a strategically located national asset on the 10,000-foot summit of Haleakala on the island of Maui. The MSSC is host to small, medium, and large aperture tracking optics, which are telescopes, including the DoD's largest optical telescope designed for tracking and imaging satellites with visible and infrared sensors to collect data on near-Earth and deep space objects. The ground-based electro-optical deep space surveillance system located on Maui and Diego Garcia are also under the 15th Space Surveillance Squadron. This squadron is unique as it fuses space domain awareness operations and space domain awareness research and development operations. It is a component of Space Delta II and also operates experimental systems under the Air Force Research Laboratory. Now, taken from a wikipedia.org article, just a very simple search. The accessibility, let me go up here to the very top, I apologize. The Maui Space Surveillance Complex is a Space Force operating location for the 15th SSC and the Air Force Research Laboratory at Haleakala Observatory on Maui. With a twofold mission, it conducts research and development on the Maui Space Surveillance System, and it oversees operation of the Maui High Performance Computing Center. The Air Force Research Lab's research and development mission on Maui was formerly called the Air Force Maui Optical Station and the Air Force Maui Optical and Supercomputing Observatory. Now, if we come down here, what sorts of things are present in this particular area and what sorts of capabilities are enabled by this Space Force system? The Maui Space Surveillance System is routinely involved in numerous observing programs and has the capability of projecting lasers into the atmosphere. You don't say. Situated at the crest of the dormant volcano Haleakala, the observatory stands at an altitude of 3,000 meters. It is essentially co-located with IAU code 566 Haleakala NAT GODSS. All right. Spanning over 30 years, the evolution of the system has demonstrated several stages in the history of space object tracking telescopes. Currently, its primary mission is for the United States Space Force Space Operations Command. The Maui Space Surveillance System combines large aperture tracking optics with visible and infrared sensors. So this is a Space Force Operations Command post. Now, who went on record just a couple of weeks ago and was shared by President Trump on TruthSocial describing Space Force having it all, having the data, knowing who won the election, collecting the election data, and in other words, they know that who the real president is, and they tracked the data. That was Dr. Jan Helper Hayes, correct? And so here we are, a Space Force headquarter base on the same island that this is being targeted on. So what is the Air Force Maui Optical and Supercomputing Site, which is the same site we're talking about in its former name? The site consists of two facilities that conduct space domain operations and research and development. Research thrusts at the site include satellite detection and identification, atmospheric compensation, astrodynamics, and orbital metrics, sensor development, laser propagation through the atmosphere, database cataloging of satellite images, and high-performance computer model simulations. The unique focus on research and development as well as operations provides a rapid development cycle from concept to operational implementation. Researchers are exposed to actual needs of the community and are able to provide innovative answers in an operationally relevant time frame. In other words, were this on our side in the war, this would be an extremely helpful asset to have, and were it on a different side or still under the black hat control in the war, we could be in for a little bit of trouble. Now, it is amazing. We've discussed on TruthSocial what occurred here in Maui, and my heart goes out to everyone that has been suffering on those islands and for everyone that is enduring what's happening in the world right now. So let's step back for a moment and appreciate where we're at. Around the same time as this directed energy attack on Maui, we had the rumors begin circulating, and then the revelations begin circulating, and then, of course, the actual ball dropping with the fourth indictment of President Donald J. Trump. This indictment coming back to primarily discussing the election in Georgia and protesting what was clearly a rigged election. This indictment also, among other indictments, gives President Trump the right to subpoena and bring to the judicial system on record in a fashion that has both standing and merit and motive evidence to show that the 2020 election was not only an insurrection, if we can call it that, or an insurgency overthrowing the government, but it was much larger and much broader scale and much more organized and much more coordinated than any of us are probably even aware of, even on this broadcast now. We are witnessing a back and forth where blows are being threatened and then exchanged in both the narrative space and in the kinetic real world space. We are at war. We are fighting for freedom. We are fighting for justice. We are fighting for truth. We are fighting for our children's longevity into the future. We are fighting to provide a safe and secure world for our progeny and generations forward to grow up in. We are fighting for the right to exist as humanity and to forward ourselves as a civilization into the annals of history continuously as we move into the future. The enemy that we have been fighting sought to do the exact opposite and to turn us into digital biomechanized slaves and kill off about 90% of the world's population in doing so. And so this process, while painful and awful and terrible, necessitates that we drag out into the light, kicking, screaming, and spewing their disgusting filth from their mouth and eyes, the individuals that are responsible for carrying out attacks against we the people, not only in the United States, but all around the world, the warlords in different nation areas, the paid off oligarchs, the godfathers of different criminal organizations and nations that run the nation's government, the individuals that are along in the matrix at the county, state, and federal level in different governmental apparatuses. In other words, the puppets and the puppeteers themselves. We have to drag out their capabilities. We have to drag out their assets. We have to drag out their equipment. We have to drag out their plan. We have to force them to show the world who they are with the world watching. And that is exactly what we have now. Maui has taken our war public. Individuals are very quickly realizing, with the type of damage and the selectiveness of the fires, that this was a calculated attack, that this was a direct, focalized assault on a we the people bastion in the Pacific, I believe in retaliation for many of the operations that we are succeeding with around the world. Look at the United States continuity of government operation. Look at the awakening. Look at the progress of the Russian military. Look at the containment operations that Russia, China, and other nations are running. Look at the BRICS nations and the rebalancing of the world power, the world polarity as it pertains to commerce and finance. Look at how the African continent and the Middle East and the Near East and the Asian nations are beginning a process of separation from the United States dependency, right? The dependency on the Western central bank backed model. We are succeeding in ways that are irrevocable to our enemies, and our enemies are retaliating. And in their retaliations, they show themselves to us. They allow us to target them more effectively. They give us the recon that we need. They allow their emotions to come into the fold. Do they have an agenda they're attempting to play out? Of course. But the agenda is always done much more subtly and much more cleverly and much more clandestinely than what we're currently witnessing on display even now. And even though we could say that some of that happens to do with us being awake now for the first time, there is a serious part of the progress, I think, or not the progress, but the progression of events that is accelerated to a point that the human being and the mass population of we the people around the world can sort of not ignore it. And to provide a good example of that, I'm going to share something with you that I found absolutely amazing, actually, just incredible, and very upsetting, actually, to tell you the truth. And then we'll close on a good note, as we always do. On Amazon.com, published on August the 10th, 2023, 48 hours after the Maui directed energy weapon fires attack, a book called Fire and Fury, the story of the 2023 Maui fire and its implications for climate change. That wasn't very long. Print length of 44 pages. In the description, let's go down here to the description. Product details, where is the description? All right. The story of the Maui fire and its implications for climate change is a gripping and eye-opening account of one of the most devastating wildfires in Hawaii's history and how it reveals the urgent need to address the global climate crisis. The book describes the harrowing experiences of the people who lived through the fire, I'm sure because they've had lots of time to give press interviews. The book also examines the causes and consequences of the fire, both locally and globally. The book draws on scientific research, official reports, and media coverage to provide a comprehensive and compelling narrative of the Maui fire and its implications for climate change. And it also offers practical solutions on how we can prevent and prepare for future wildfires, and how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and adapt to a changing climate. This is propaganda if there ever was any. And I believe that it is likely that this particular book and many other texts that are being fielded to the mass population and have been for a long time are AI contrived and ghost written. This is psychological warfare. This is a deployment, a seeding of the narrative in a way that makes them overtly obvious. It cannot be ignored. The events are correlated in a way that is inseparable. And so when we appreciate that there is no reasonable or rational or academic basis that any sort of text describing these events from Maui of 8/8, merely 1 week ago today, when we appreciate that there is no reasonable basis that a text can be written in that period of time, we have to acknowledge either one of two things. Either this individual, Dr. Miles Stone, claimed to be the author, was a soothsayer and a prophet of extraordinary clairvoyance and clarity, or we have something else at play. Now, I thought it was interesting, if you click on Dr. Miles Stone on Amazon, what you find is an unusual, eclectic variety from which to draw supposed expertise. Dr. Miles Stone is responsible for titles such as The Life Story Book of Billy Waters, a gamble entrepreneur and criminal, Fire and Fury, the story of the Maui fire, Drago, the unbreakable Navy SEAL who escaped communism and fought for freedom, a biography of Michael Vickers from Special Forces to Undersecretary, Nicholas Sparks' life story book, a walk through his memories, challenges, and achievements, Jason Derulo's biography, Rise of a Pop Star, Hassard Lee book, a biography of Hassard Lee, vegan weight loss book, life story book, Christina Najar Tink's book, The Life Story of Lonzo Ball, The Life Story of Hunter Biden, the president's son, The Life Story of Shannon Doherty. This is, if someone has this sort of basis for their research and this sort of broad academic understanding, I commend them. But I just have my doubts. And given the titling and given the pattern and the layout of the descriptions on many of these titles, which we won't take up any more of your time, or I won't take up any more of your time today, Patriots, to discuss, this reeks as being AI generated. And so that's where I'd like to actually close on a positive note. The fact that they are having to deploy much of their Agenda 2030 years and years and years ahead of time, and that we have forced them into a situation around the world where their responses must be desperate, must be kinetic, must be overt. And that's what we've been trying to force them out into the light for the entire public to see for a long time, right, Patriots? We want this to be overt. We want people to see that the elections were stolen. We want people to see that our climate is manipulated. We want people to see that they're poisoning us. We want people to see that this is all coordinated. We want people to see that this is carried out by powers not only within government, but above and in between government. Interagency liaison offices, different deep projects and deep agencies, different governmental puppeteers through finance, law, and blackmail, right? The Mossad blackmail operations around the world. We want the public, we want the population to see the truth. Sometimes you cannot tell them, you must show them. And when Q says that the ending is not for everyone, I've been remiss to offer an opinion on that particular statement. And honestly, I still am a bit remiss. I don't know exactly what that means. I'll preface this by being perfectly plain and transparent. I really don't know what that means. But I can say that if in the process of destroying the real pathogenic and real WMD threats to mankind, in other words, atmospheric weapons, weaponized grain, weaponized seedlings that produce poison food, weaponized big pharma research and development that's been going on, biological warfare research, the gain of function research of different pathogens, the sick, sadistic, awful practice of SRA and the abuse and torture of children and human slaves, human trafficking slaves all around the world. If we choose to dismantle that apparatus, they are going to bite back. And so the end may not be for everyone, because through this process, we also have to fight the junkyard dog. We, the people at the civilian level, have to get involved in the ways that we know how. And we have to be awake to the problems first that exist in our communities. And those problems may be many of the same problems that everyone else has, but they have specific focal traits. They have local lenses that only we can appreciate and only we can fix. And so that is my message of encouragement to you today, is that we are beginning to see the war becoming public in a way that is driving even the independent conservative, even the nonpartisan political voter out there, even the working class person everywhere, right, across all political divides. The war is going public now in a way that is garnering their attention and driving action and driving motivation. And no, I don't think that in some respects this was all for that. I think in many respects, a lot of us out there, well-meaning and sincere and genuine as we were simply wrong on how quickly this process was actually going to be done. Donald Trump did remind us, or did tell us in 2016, that he had had discussions with the people who would run our government for the next 8 years, which takes us all of the way to 2024, and what I think could be a momentous and historic, in ways that is difficult to describe, year for mankind as we press forward. We're only now in August. The amount of awakening and the amount of kinetic surface level play that we're now experiencing, the war being overt, the destruction of Ukrainian missile plants that are connected to North Korea, the destruction of bioweapons that are being trafficked and moved, and the basis, right, for those bioweapons that are being trafficked and moved all around the world. We're witnessing this in real time here in our world now. That is amazing. Truthfully, I was unsure many, many years ago that we would ever arrive at a point where these sorts of topics not only could be discussed, but would actually be handled, where we, the people, would generate such a large alliance of collective thought, such a large alliance of same belief and same purpose and same mission. Whether you use Q as your inspiration or simply patriotism, knowing that your nation has been usurped and taken away from you, and that's not right by the laws under God, right? We have inalienable rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think that is the self-control and self-direction of our own destinies. And we're having these conversations and we're seeing these events through. And yes, it is painful. But in the painful process, we are also watching them forced into destroying their own infrastructure. They released bioweaponized mosquitoes in Maui 3 months ago. I'm sure many of them were burned up in those flames. And so this is a back and forth where, as we continue to move the needle forward, as we continue to dismantle not only their lies, but their kinetic real-world infrastructure, as we continue to draw out what remains, what is still left to be destroyed and highlighted and purged and cleaned, we can be assured that they will fight very hard, and we are ready for every blow that they can throw. If you're in a place where you're able to support directly the people of Maui and get direct relief to the on-the-ground citizenry in that area, I encourage you and I implore you to do so, and keep in mind the legal restrictions both in your municipalities and in other municipalities as well. We get through this together. We take this journey together. A beautiful, brave new world lies ahead. One step at a time, Patriots. One step at a time. This is SG Anon. I'll be back with you again soon. Go out today, spend some time in the sun, feel the breeze on your face, and feel the grass under your feet. Be thankful that you have the ability to perceive the God of all creation, because our enemy does not. I'll be back with each of you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.